Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Reeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Before we get started today, I just wanted to highlight something that makes me really sad. I see so many creative business people, artists, crafters, makers, struggling with some aspect of online technology, the techie stuff. And the way it's holding back their business, it's a barrier to their future profits and progress. Now, if this is you, or sounds like one of your friends, then you can tap into my years of online business experience providing consultancy and advice and training and mentoring. You can tap into that and hire me for a brain picking session so that you can get impartial, practical and wise advice from somebody who understands the creative aspects of your business, so that you can remove those blocks and stop technology from getting in your way and start using it to make more profit in your business. And you can find that booking link on my main website, which is virtualityworks.com, but you can also get there from the Stitchery Stories website and from my profiles as well. So please don't struggle. There's no need. I can give you that support and get you moving forward again. Anyway, now let's dig in to this week's fantastic guest. Hello and welcome today to our lovely guest, Vanessa Marr. Hi, Vanessa.
Hi, Sue. Lovely to hear from you.
It's brilliant. Really been looking forward to chatting with you today. But I'll first of all do your bio and your links and stuff. Vanessa is an artist, academic and designer based in East Sussex, England. She's a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts and is currently principal lecturer and course leader at the University of Brighton. Her work is underpinned by visual design theory and process, yet embraces an intuitive and physical approach that facilitates self-authorship, which she explores predominantly through hand-stitch and creative writing. She is drawn to cloth as a medium that holds the legacy of so-called women's work and its potential for subversion and quiet activism. She's best known for her hand-embroidered dusting cloths, which form part of an ongoing collaborative arts project, Women and Domesticity, What's Your Perspective? And that invites embroidered statements on this theme. Her work has been exhibited and presented widely in academic, community and arts contexts in the UK. Vanessa regularly participates in collaborative, creative and research projects and never stops learning, making and writing. And stitching, hopefully, as well.
Yes, lots of stitching.
Yes. So, Vanessa, brilliant. Now, Vanessa's links will be in her episode, as usual, on the stitcherystories.com. But perhaps the most instantly accessible would be Instagram, Vanessa?
Yeah, I think so. That's definitely the thing I'm best at updating.
Yeah, it seems a bit easier somehow, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is, definitely. My blog's always out of date. Instagram tends to be pretty up to date. Just the blog, I'm pretty good at updating as well.
I'm sure everyone's nodding their heads at that point. So you've got 2 Instagram channels, 2 blog posts, and of course your academic profile. So all of those links will be in Vanessa's episode on stitcherystories.com. So before we dive in, a few things occurred to me that's happening this week. So I don't know whether you call it synchronicity or the universe or whatever. So today, but a couple of days ago, I spoke to Kirsty MacLeod about her red dress project. So there we were looking at embroidery and women's empowerment with red fabric for the dress and embroidery. And then obviously today we're going to get on to Vanessa's kind of big project. She does other things, but, we will be talking about this idea of the domestic dusters. So we're using predominantly red thread on yellow cloth and embroidering women's statements about domesticity. We've got International Women's Day coming up quite shortly as well. So lots of things about women's empowerment there. And it's about coming up for a year ago since I first spoke to Vanessa with my Embroideries Guild host of Talking Threads hat on as well. So Vanessa's one of the few people who, I will admit this now, I have actually spoken to before I've spoken to on the podcast. So there we are. A bit of a rambling synchronicity there, but it made sense to me anyway.
And it was really nice to have a chance to chat with you again, Sue. Thank you.
So you're another one who's been on my kind of mental list of, I must get round to inviting Vanessa. So about months or so ago, I actually pulled my finger out and started getting in touch with people again. So hurrah. Right then. Anyway, enough waffle. So Vanessa, the $100 million question. What would you like to share with us about what you're working on at the moment and what's got you excited?
Okay, I think the biggest thing I'm excited about at the moment is the upcoming collaboration with PEG, the Profanity Embroidery Group. So,
woohoo!
Yes, I had a chat with them, the people that organised that a while ago. They have an exhibition coming up which is about domesticity, and they said that people often want to get involved with their group, but it's not possible always. They don't have an open membership. So we thought that it would be fantastic to have a collaboration. So we opened up the invitation for anybody to embroider upon a duster their frustrations to do with domesticity, and they were allowed to swear. And I have to say, it's had the most amazing response. People are really, really enjoying being allowed to be rude on dusters. It opens on the 14th of February and will be exhibited right the way through February in somewhere called the 12 Taps, which is a gin bar in Whitstable. I haven't visited it yet. That's my task next week when I'm hanging them, but it looks really cool. And we are well over 100. I think we're going to be about 150 dusters, and I'm still logging them. But it's really brilliant. It's very exciting, and it's wonderful that the postman's been knocking on the door every day with a big pile of parcels saying, "What's going on? What are you doing?"
Oh, brilliant! Yeah, I have to say, when I spotted that, it was ages ago. So obviously the Annie and Bridget from PEG were early guests. 2018, I think, on here. So I've loved them and followed them ever since, and I keep going, oh, it's not fair. I'm miles away. I would desperately come and join your group, but I'm at the other end of the country. So when I spotted this, first I didn't do anything about it, and then it was just really, I think, beginning of January, I thought, oh, Susan, pull your finger out. Come on, get on with it and do one. So I did, and mine was based on, well, I'll come back to it later, but my mum's famous phrase about housework. There's more to life than housework, but I've added some swearing into it because I'm sure in her head she was swearing as well. Well, I know she was.
It's a beautiful duster. It really is, and it's just been hilarious.
It must have been the best laugh ever opening all of those. Brilliant.
Well, I have a system going with my husband where he sits with the Excel sheet in front of him, and then I read out what's on the duster. And the air is very blue, and we have to make sure my daughter's not in the room.
Well, I'm going to come back to the logistics of all of this, but as an introduction, that project has just really been hilarious, and even just looking at the ones that have been shared is brilliant. And I shared mine with friends online and stuff, and you can people going, what the hell are you doing? I said, it's a project. You are allowed to. The whole point of the project is you swear about housework on a duster. So that's what I've done. All right, end off. I don't want to hear anymore.
And that's what's been interesting, actually, because the project does more than swear on dusters. This is kind of a little piece of it. And so I've mostly been sharing the sweary ones in stories, so that when people revisit the site, when there's another theme, they don't think, it's all just about swearing.
Exactly. Yeah, this is a sub project, isn't it?
A sub project.
We're all excited about. Yes,
but there will be. I'll make sure that I film it all, and there's a way of seeing these. Maybe it'll have to have its own section on the blog with a warning on it or something.
Yes. So before we dive down, we'll come back to this this element. But so you're excited about the collaboration with Profanity Embroidery Group, and what else are you working on then, Vanessa?
I've always got a ridiculous amount.
I'm going to say, I know you've got a big long list.
But the two things that are coming up are for International Women's Day calls. Right. So one of them I'm embroidering a tablecloth with women who are misrepresented upon it. I did a tablecloth last year, about this time actually, for a symposium that I presented artwork at rather than a paper, which was exploring Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber. And I did an embroidery onto a tablecloth where I set them each a place, sort of influenced by Judy Chicago's Dinner Party, which came out at the same time as that particular book. So I gave different characters a plate and a place setting, and I embroidered objects that related to their story around their plate, so that it was almost like they were having a sort of a dinner party with these objects that could potentially be discussed and passed around in my imagination. And so I'm doing that again, but with a different set of women at the moment. The deadline to show the finished artwork is the end of next week, so I'm madly embroidering that. And then there's also just come out a call at work for an exhibition to do with International Women's Day, where the theme is inclusivity. And I'd already made some base layers of patchwork that I knew I wanted to put text onto, which was very organised of me. Doesn't normally happen. I think they were intended for something else and that didn't happen. So I'm going to use those and have some stitches on them, kind of Tracy Emin style quilts, to make some statements about inclusivity. So hopefully I'll get both of those finished in between counting dusters and hanging dusters and everything else.
And not using dusters in any other way, of course.
No, never used for dusting. No, definitely not.
Epic. We've got an awful lot to have a good old chat about here. So where do you want to start, Vanessa, with, we just mentioned there about the collaboration with Peg, but this idea about using dusters as a vehicle for sentiment, for statement, is not new, is it? So what got you into that in the first place? Where did that idea come from? And if you want to explain, as you say, the domestic dusters thing is not all just about swearing. It's a long established project that you've been running.
Yeah.
Talk us through that a bit in the context of your work and how it came along and where it is now.
Sure, absolutely. So I've been working with dusters since 2012, so over 10 years now. I suspect it's going to be my life's work because I keep coming up with new ideas, and I'm doing a PhD around dusters at the moment, typically.
Who would have thought?
I've been doing that forever. I will eventually finish it one day. It's rather challenging fitting it around everything else. Yeah. So dusters came from a piece of research that I was doing where I was exploring the domestic origins of fairy tales, and I hadn't really thought about fairy tales in this context before, but I discovered that they were told by women often when they were working, and that work often involved cloth in some form. There was a book called something like Women's Work the First 20,000 Years. That might not be exactly the title.
Something along those lines.
Sounds exhausting, doesn't it? Yeah. By someone called Elizabeth Whalen Barber, and she talks about how women began working with cloth out of practicality. And then, of course, there's the very famous book, The Subversive Stitch by Rosita Parker, within which she talks about how stitching and embroidery in particular has been something that's been linked to women's work for hundreds of years. In some ways, it was a means of earning money. It was a means of gaining basic literacy, sort of embroidering a sampler, but also it was something that was indicated our powerlessness in the context of a woman stooped and stitching and not really being allowed to do anything else.
Yeah.
So that really contextualized embroidery for me, and so I wanted to find something that would represent domesticity, something where when anyone saw it they'd think, oh, okay, I can make that connection. So my background way back is in graphic design, so I suppose I'm often looking for really clear visual clues that will indicate something. So that's probably where that came from.
Right.
So I started working with dusters, and you stitched a set of 7, which I called Promises and Expectations. And they had fairy tale promises that were subverted, embroidered onto them. So things like happily ever after, this is not the end, once upon a time, her possibilities were endless. I also embroidered objects in a concrete poetry style where you have a shape of something and then the words form that shape. So for example, there's an iron and the words form the shape of an iron. And I chose an iron because apparently it's one of the weapons most commonly used in domestic violence, which is obviously awful. But it was a way of kind of being able to touch on all these different elements of domesticity. So I had scissors spelled with the word brutal. I had a thimble. A thimble indicating protection. So I did these, and then I was having a conversation with a very good friend of mine. We walk the dogs together and have big conversations about art and creativity and things like that. And I said, I just wonder if this can go anywhere else, because where it sprung from was feeling like all of the domestic tasks that I was doing as a wife, as a mother, as a full-time working woman, all of these things, that lots of the things that I was doing were just kind of defaulted to my gender. It wasn't something that I'd ever said, okay, I'll do that. There was a sort of underpinning expectation in society that somehow that was my responsibility. And I thought, I'm sure I'm not the only person that feels like this.
Yeah.
And so I opened out a question that said, women and domesticity, what's your perspective? Created these little packs. A friend of mine who's a textile artist very kindly offered me her studio space for an exhibition, and I thought I'll see what happens. And asked everybody I knew, and this was back in 2014, and we went from 20 to 70 within the space of a week, just as the deadline was coming up, very much as is happening with the peg dusters at the moment.
Typical.
Yeah. And from that point onward, and then people came along, and it was just amazing. Everybody was telling me these amazing stories about what had happened to them, connecting to being a woman, connecting to being a mother, connecting to caring, really, but also that invisible labor that sits behind it. And the duster, to me, really kind of epitomizes that invisible labor, because it's a cleaning cloth, it's cheap, it doesn't have any value, but yet it's beautiful and it's really soft and it's very recognizable. So it really just kind of, for me, holds all of those connections to do with invisible women's work, so-called women's work. And it turns out that other people are able to read it that way too.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see all the nodding heads going on at the moment. Everybody who's listening, I bet you're all nodding your head going, yes, yeah, everything falls down to me as well. I mean, I often say, I'm a single mum, and it's just like every single thing in my life, if I don't organise it, it don't happen.
Yeah.
And after a while, it makes you sound really awful, but after a while you just think, do you know what? Stuff it. I'm not organising anything for anybody else anymore. If now it happens, well, never mind. I don't care.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just exhausting, isn't it? So plus work, etc., etc. Yeah, wow.
And that's not to say that it's like that for everyone. I know that's not everyone's experience. And these days, particularly if you're a single parent, of course, I'm not a single parent now, but I have been in the past. So I do really empathize with that. And I've got friends that are, and I really recognize how much everything comes down to you. Yeah. But even in a relationship, and particularly heterosexual relationships, I think there's just a legacy, somebody's mum did it, and then somehow that just gets passed down. Mm-hmm. And it's what's often referred to, I've noticed recently, as the mental load. It's not that you're not necessarily the only one doing the washing up or the only one loading the dishwasher or whatever, but the mental load, the organisation, the holding it all together, the feeling that somehow if it doesn't get done, you are the one that the criticality would be pushed towards.
I think that's why our heads feel like they're going to explode all the time, don't they? Because we've got all this stuff floating around in our heads about all the stuff, and other people often don't. If there's
holding it all together, isn't it?
It is exactly. And there was a real strong example of that happened to me when back in the day I worked for Nissan. And I was in the IT department, and I worked on lots of big projects. Computers has been my life. And I went to Japan on a project, and I think there was one other lady from production control went, but it was like a posse of men went over to Japan, and big different project teams were setting a packaging plant up. And there was no other women involved, because even then, so this was in the early 90s, mid 1990s, the Japanese ladies, once they got married, kind of stayed at home. And even at work, they were called the office ladies. And they had a little area with like a curtain over the door where they would go make tea and things. And I was like, oh my God. And the Japanese men didn't actually know how to treat me. So I was treated as an honourable man. You know, I was like, it was just like, well, we can't treat you as the Japanese ladies because you're here with part of this group, you know, and you've got input here. And it was just like, it was just the strangest thing to have experienced. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, right, okay, fine. So the only way they could get their head around it was basically I was just like an honourable man, part of the group. You know, I wasn't actually a female. It was brilliant.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I think there are elements of that kind of, obviously not to that extent, but there is still, I think there's assumptions at work as well. Unconscious for sure.
It was clearing the cups and he was making the tea. Yeah.
Well, who's going to make sure things happen?
Yeah.
Exactly. Who'll remember that this needs doing? Who's going to organise this or that? There is a legacy there, and on the one hand, it's brilliant because you're needed and you feel very sort of important is the wrong word, but I think nurturers often need to be nurtured, don't they? Need to be needed. Nurturers need to be needed.
Yeah, exactly.
That's part of it, and there are positive things that come from it, but there's also exhaustion, and I'm really with the dusters, it's that invisibility that I'm trying to capture.
Absolutely. So you really hit on something there that everybody can, you know, everyone can really connect to on different levels, definitely. So because I like niche detail, what you mentioned before about logging. So, you know, if people send these dusters in over all this time, do they send stories in? You know, do you get the stories with them, and do you log those? And where is all this kept and looked after? What about all that? You've probably grown a monster, haven't you?
It has grown into a bit of a monster. Physically, I have an entire chest of drawers now that is completely full of dusters. And I used to have dusters sort of paraphernalia around it. So washing line that I used to hang them, pegs and things like that in the same drawers. But I think I'm looking at the pile from Peg as I'm talking to you now. I'm realising that we may need to extend that storage process because there are now almost too many for the chest of drawers. I have a massive spreadsheet, and that records the words that are on the duster, the name of the person that sent it in, and any contact details that they've sent me. The stories are in another folder of all of their own, and it's so lovely when they come because people will often write a letter or send a card along with it, and even when they're coming digitally, I'll have messages through Instagram or through the blog or via email, and people tell me why they've chosen to embroider a duster, and how they've connected to it and what it means to them and the story that sits behind it. And that is one of the biggest privileges of the project. It never fails to move me and makes me laugh and cry in equal amounts.
I should imagine. Yeah, I mean, actually, I'll hold my hand up. I was in a rush to get to post, so I think you got like a small square, one of them little tablet notebook things with some illegible writing scrawled on it. Oh, dear me. Yeah, so you're quite the archivist there as well.
It's turning into that. And I will ultimately submit them to an archive of some description for sure. I keep sort of thinking, well, you know, maybe the project will end and then I see another opportunity and it doesn't. But the deal is kind of that they join the collection. Sometimes people will send a stamped addressed envelope and ask for it to be returned. And obviously I do that if that's what people would like to do. Some of them have only ever existed digitally in my collection because they were collected over lockdown when things obviously weren't being posted to each other. That was when I took it onto Instagram. So there's a kind of digital side only to it as well.
Right.
But most of the time, the deal is that they join the touring collection, and every single opportunity I get to get them out, I work full time, so there is a limited amount of time I have available to do that. But I'm generally managed to exhibit them a couple of times a year, if not a bit more. Although I have to say, as there have become more and more, now I'm needing to sort of organise them into themes or think like that lot went out last time, so this time I'm going to make sure that batch goes.
Crikey, yeah. And does this does this fall under the umbrella of your academic work as well? Or is this like, oh, this is Vanessa's kind of mad side hustle kind of a thing? Because obviously you've got your academic role, haven't you?
I
Does
have.
that make sense? Are you allowed to answer that question?
I am allowed to answer that question. Absolutely, it does fall under my academic work. So one of the great things about the dusters is that it's something that can be approached purely from a crafter maker type of perspective, you know, people who like creating things, and it works on that level. As I mentioned, I'm doing a PhD on it. With that,
who'd have thought you could do a PhD on dusters? That's intriguing in itself. I know that I'm just being facetious there, but yeah, go on.
It's a great thing to say you're doing a dusters on. It's a PhD on. It's a good party piece. Within that, I'm actually exploring. I explain the stitching as drawing, and by doing that, I'm able to attach various theories to it that explore drawing as a way of capturing my own domestic experience. And there's a theory called autoethnography, which is essentially stories that are biographies that sit within a social or a political or an economic context, and the purpose of those stories is to entice change in some way. So not a million miles off the craftivist context that you and I spoke about before. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I did look up that word as well, because I hadn't heard. I was thinking, what the heck's this? So yeah, it's a real mouthful, isn't it? But it also brings right back in a circle, doesn't it, about the elements of story tales, fairy tales that we don't think about, that we don't. When you delve down into it, there's a lot more to them, isn't there? So yeah,
absolutely,
I like that. Yeah.
And because what it got me excited about the fairy tales was that women were making them when they were telling them when they were working. But the thing about fairy tales is that they reference their time. That, you know, they hold that social context. They hold advice. They hold warnings. They hold all sorts of things that are to do with the way that you live your life, framed within a story, which is not a million miles off autoethnography either. So there's kind of the academic side, and then there's the creative side. So I'm always myself stitching into a duster, whether or not that's answering some sort of academic question for myself, or whether or not it's purely just because I want to make it. But I'm able to take the project into contexts that are both academic and arts, but also into community contexts as well. So I'm working with a charity at the moment, for example. We're exploring how to use dusters for really powerful means within a particular charity to really make a difference. I'm exploring how I might use dusters working with carers, working with refugees. I've worked with the dusters with people who have experienced domestic violence, people who have who are close to the streets, have been homeless. And so there are connections that could be made in all sorts of different ways. And so because I'm a practice-based researcher, that's the type of academic that I am. So I write, but I also make at the same time as I'm writing. They fit within that context really comfortably. But they're also something that can be done just purely because you want to, you know, purely for the fun of it.
It's a nice thing to do. And I suppose speaking with, you know, working with those, you know, the kind of groups that you've just been talking about there, of all, you know, people who've got a lot of challenges going on, typically those groups, then again, the duster, it's a common object, isn't it? And it's probably not overwhelming either. It's not this fancy piece of material. It's not an unknown, scary thing that, it's too nice to put any stitches in, you know, that sort of thing that goes through your head as well. So it just works on so many levels. If you were a Venn diagram, we haven't just got 2 circles on the go here, have we, Vanessa? We've got about 6 million circles to make your Venn diagram.
To be honest, that's what my head feels like a lot of the time. But yeah, you make a good point. I think one of the ways that I describe the duster is a voice. So it becomes, when the embroidery is on the duster, it becomes a voice. And that voice can be for fun, you know, particularly in the peg thing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just been a laugh.
Enjoying having a good old naughty swear. It can be about expressing pain. It can be about relating a story that other people empathize with. It can be for humor. It can be to celebrate. You know, some people there is a comfort with domesticity, that's important.
Yes.
If we didn't do all of these tasks, if we didn't clean our houses, we'd be ill. So
yes, there is the other side.
There's a necessity to it.
We pretend we don't do any housework, but we do some,
but we actually kind of have to. Yeah, absolutely. So often I'll describe the embroidery on the duster as a voice, and that was really where I suppose the academic research came from, in terms of I didn't really it was surprising to see the change that happens to people when they are working with the duster. They will get rebellious, or they will get thoughtful, or they will think about things in a different way. Sometimes people change their minds about what they want to stitch on it, because there's something about sitting and embroidering and kind of reflecting that legacy of women working with cloth. So you've got that kind of context there, the kind of connection from an historical and from a legacy perspective, with a cloth that's screaming at you that really you ought to be doing something with it. So that message sits there as well. And then you're choosing to spend time doing that, because hand embroidery takes a really long time. And so you have to spend time sitting with this object. And that changes the way that you think. There are changes that happen within you that connect your lived experience of domesticity, whatever that might be, to the cloth, which then becomes a voice when it's exhibited. So there are layers to the way that people experience the dusters as well.
Yeah, gosh, I can honestly, when you then add all the kind of social aspects to it, and the women's role aspects and all the rest of it, yes, you can totally see why there's tons and tons and tons of things to say in terms of a PhD. I'm not surprised it's taking you ages as well, because crikey,
there is a book in here somewhere.
Yeah, it's almost an endless topic, isn't it?
Hence why it's the life work. I suspect. Yeah. Because there's always another way.
So when you're stitching, do you only ever stitch on dusters these days? Do you ever break free and think, oh, I'll get some silk out or some linen or something?
Well, what I've noticed is that I'm drawn to cloth that's got a message or some sort of visual connection made to it. So the tablecloth I'm doing at the moment, there's no dusters in that.
Yes, you did say.
The patchwork, I've used old fabric. I've done work on vintage. I love working with old vintage dressing tablecloths. I've done work embroidering into vintage 90s, that sort of thing. But I'm definitely drawn to a cloth that's got another purpose, and then I can use it in a different way to serve it somehow.
The vintage tablecloths particularly often have been boiled and washed, and there might be a little hole in them, but they feel so lovely, don't they? They're really old. I'm thinking of the sort of things that probably 100 years old now, stuff my grandma would have had. I'm sure they're probably lurking around in my mum's cupboard somewhere. They just feel so lovely. This really old worn linen particularly is lovely for doing that as well. So
what's nice about them actually is the ones that I've selected are ones that somebody else has embroidered. So I don't know who that person is, but it's really lovely to work with something that I know somebody else handled and somebody else hand embroidered, and then I'm giving it another life by embroidering my work onto it. So I feel like I'm collaborating with them somehow in a distant sort of a way.
Yeah, that's a lovely thought. That is a really lovely thought. Because so often, you go into charity shops, and I quite like to, see if I can find these sorts of things now. And you think, well, what are you going to do with it? Well, I don't really know. But yeah, do some embroidery on them because they're just so lovely. And as you say, somebody else has already started the process. So yeah, collaborating with our ghosts.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, now there's the title for a piece of work. You'll see that coming up again soon. I'm making a note now.
What did I say? Collaborating with our ghosts.
Collaboration with ghosts. I like
Get me written down fast. You heard it here first on Stitchery Stories, folks.
There's something there, I think.
Now, the other thing I was thinking about as well is you touched on it there about other people's embroidery. So when you get the dusters, you catalogue them. Is there any kind of trend that you see in terms of styles or, things that stand out? I suppose. Can you see what I'm trying to? I'm not asking the question very good, but I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I really encourage about the project is that you don't have to be brilliant at sewing to take part.
Right, brilliant.
There are people who are fantastic embroiderers, yourself included, who make really beautiful dusters, and they're fantastic. But there are also people who've never embroidered anything in their lives, and they say, well, I can't sew. And I say, well, you can sew a straight line.
You can go in and out. Yeah.
So my preference is backstitch. I'm obsessed with it.
Oh, I love backstitch. Yeah, it's a standing joke with me and my backstitch.
It's great.
I don't think I did any on mine. I think I broke free and didn't do backstitch. Oh no, I did. I did do some. Yeah, I lie. Go on, sorry.
It's easy, isn't it? I mean, you literally
you go in and out and you can do something. Yeah.
I think because the original art ones I made were text on dusters, and then in response to that, I did the early call back in 2014 for people to do the same. And so they embroidered text onto dusters.
Yeah.
So predominantly it's words that are embroidered. Sometimes only images, sometimes images with it as well. I've run workshops inviting people to collage onto them, or so with paper or with fabric. So a sort of a different approach to applique, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I've done some like that, and I've worked with some things I did a while ago actually, where somebody said, I want to get involved, but all that stitching scares me. And so that was, we started working with vintage magazines that talked about, the lovely 1950s ones with pictures of mum smiling while she's baking the bread.
And secretly wants to kill somebody. Yeah.
They make you see, but they're quite interesting in terms of the legacy that I mentioned earlier, kind of bringing those two things together.
They're quite hilarious, some of those. When you look at them with a fresh pair of eyes, you think, good grief.
Yeah. So I suppose words and images predominantly are the things that makes them, I think really accessible. They've also been sculptured and twisted and all sorts of things in various contexts when I've explored them, but predominantly it's words and images, and it's backstitch or chain stitch. And I have a blue pen that dissolves with water, and I have about 20 in my house. And what I do is I draw onto the dust or whatever I want to embroider, and then essentially illustrate, I suppose, with thread. And that is an approach that seems to be popular as well, whether that's because that's what I've promoted or because other people also find it works for them, I'm not sure.
Yeah, because embroidery in text, I think, is one of them, or can be one of the most difficult things to do, and can feel quite off-putting, I suppose, really. I used, dressmakers transfer. I printed it out and then kind of got a little pen and really pressed down hard. And actually I had a red coloured transfer thing, so I could use red. But yeah, I've got a disappearing pen. Thing is, mine, I think I need to get a new one. It disappears too damn fast. I've got to be really quick.
I've got one like that that's purple.
Yes, purple, yeah.
The blue ones are the best, but I've also got a light box. And so what I often do is draw it out on paper, or even design it on the computer and print it out.
Yeah.
And then I trace over it with the light box. But you could use a window in the same way.
That's right.
But yes, I also have a purple one, and you're right, you have to stick very fast.
Oh, you've got to be really quick, haven't you? Because I remember I've fallen for that one before. I did a really intricate thing, and oh God, it's disappeared, and I've only done
blue ones are the best.
The blue ones, right? I'll remember that. Excellent. Top tip: if your pen disappears, get a blue disappearing pen.
Water removal, and you don't have to soak the cloth either. You can mist it, or sometimes I will just wet my hand and wipe it, and it will go.
Excellent. We'll talk a bit about your time, like you were saying about embroidery, and you called that
domestic academic.
Do you want to talk about that bit? Because that brings some of this together as well.
Like I said, I've selected embroidery because of that reference to women's work. But one of the other main reasons I selected embroidery was because it's something that I can actually do around my busy life. So I have this kind of need to do it. Ever since I really got into it. My granny taught me, my mum taught me, I've always been able to do it. But ever since I started working with the dusters, it's become a need as much as it has something that I would choose to do. But I work full time. I've got lots of children, a busy life. I've got 4 daughters and a stepdaughter. So
crikey, house full.
Keep me busy. Well, most of them are grown up these days. But I needed something that was possible to do. So it was not, I couldn't couldn't paint huge canvases because that would require me to go to a space to do it.
Yeah,
I couldn't create videos because that would require me to go to a space to do it. My duster's always in my work bag, always in my handbag. I embroider in front of a TV in the evenings. I embroider when I'm waiting for something. I embroider on the train. I embroider in long departmental meetings when you just have to listen. I'm sitting there embroidering too. And
I
so
love that.
I actually know if other people do it as well. I'm starting a movement to get people to embroider in Zoom
Other people have mentioned that as well, and I just think, God, you can tell I was in the corporate world before Zoom, etc., etc., etc. 20 years ago since I walked away from corporate life, and I just think, if I'd have turned up with at Nissan at a car factory in a male-dominated environment, turned up with a duster and started embroidering, can you imagine that?
It does help that I'm in the school
in
of
academia,
art.
yes, exactly, yes.
It does help I'm doing that.
It's that mad art woman.
I did actually have to explain once because I realised, when you've got your camera on, you look a bit odd because you keep looking up and down. And my hand keeps lifting up and down. But then that's how I then discovered that several other people were doing it too.
As well.
Yeah. I've just written a paper actually where I did a case study on that specifically, relating stitch as drawing to mental health. So I've written a chapter for a book about it, because I have really noticed that if I am feeling stressed and then I think, oh God, I've got to sit in this long meeting and I've got so much I need to be doing.
I could do something else.
Sit there and I'm stitching. It calms me down and I actually pay better attention because I'm not thinking, I should be doing lots of other things or tempted to check my email surreptitiously in the background. I actually focus and listen to what they're saying, and keeping my hands busy creating something actually really, really stills me. Really,
it's getting rid of that mental chatter.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. I would like to stress I'm obviously fully paying attention to what I need to be working on.
Yeah, we don't want to get you sacked. We know.
No,
yes.
No. Just need to get everybody embroidering in these meetings, and then everyone will be very zen-like and calm because it's very good for your mental health.
Oh, I think it's fab. You can tell I escaped corporate life a very, very long time ago, and have probably made myself unemployable in that corporate sense again. So, especially in the wild west of computer coding, can you imagine it?
I don't think I'd be brave enough to embroider in a board meeting full of men. No, although there was a book I read or a film or something where somebody knitted constantly and they were frustrated with, and I thought I get that because you can focus then because your hands are busy and you're channeling all that everything into the embroidery. So but yes, absolutely. The reason I embroider is because I can take it with me. It makes it possible. It really does. And because I'm obsessed with it.
I think what's really drawn me to kind of you and your project as well is that you have created a really brilliant bridge between academia, between art, in an academic sense, I suppose, and then connecting that with the lives and lived experiences of loads of women, with the thoughts going through their head about what it is that they are or aren't doing. And, and then this added thing of, we can put this on a duster. It's a small portable thing. And, isn't this a great opportunity for people who aren't artists to be able to have some little part of themselves collected as part of a creative project. So I love, as I say, if you were a Venn diagram, you'd be like 9 million circles. It's like, I really, really enjoy that aspect of what you're pulling together.
Thank you. I think that's one of the most exciting things about it. It's really important to me that it's not exclusive. Academia can sound really scary. Being in the art world can sound really scary. Both of those spaces can be quite exclusive, and I hope that this is something that, like you say, bridges that, and anyone can be an artist, anybody can make something. Everybody's voice is valued, everybody's got something that's worth hearing, and sometimes it starts off with cleaning because it's a cleaning cloth, but actually it's not about cleaning. That's the gateway. It's the gateway into those conversations about what does your lived experience look like? What's life like for you? Where can we connect on that? It removes those barriers because we've all got this in common. This is something that everybody shares. We all have a domestic space. or something that we would like to be a domestic space. And even if you're homeless, you're then missing that domestic space, and that's the poignant thing that you're exploring. So the need for a domestic space, I think, is with all of us, and therefore there's that connection that can be made.
Yeah. And have you had contributions from men? Do men want to do this sort of thing as well?
A few. It's open to them.
I don't want to be controversial. I'm just asking from a point of view.
Yeah, I did some work in August. Gosh, I want to say 2017. It was a while ago. As part of Pride in Brighton, which was really interesting. That had lots of young men involved in it, and they all told me about their mums, and they all told me about how their housemates didn't clean up properly. Men are invited, and there are a few, but predominantly it's women. I suppose the question is women, but I don't say women, what do you think? No. I say domesticity as a collective idea. What do you think?
What do you think exactly?
But not surprisingly, it is mostly women that are responding. I've had some interesting submissions from LGBTQ plus community as well. That's been really interesting. I've got one that I'm is on my desk. I'm dying to share it, but I want to get the other side of the rude sweary dusters first, so it doesn't get
lost in there. Yes,
in that kind of context. But I think, sitting within this as well, of course, is conversations about gender expectations, and gender can be lots of different things. So I think that comes up in it too.
Yeah, gosh, so many things. So it's interesting where you're saying you're getting to the point where, you've already done it, is start to categorize. You can clump these together now. You've got so many. What headline categorizations have you can you see in all of this?
Oh, that's a good question. Something I would probably term as rebellious nonchalance. So basically pretending that you don't clean, but we know full well you do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of that going on. Lots of people talk about their mothers.
Yeah.
I suppose, again, that comes down that kind of female legacy. Lots of people talk about mums. Lots of people will talk about cleaning, inevitably, because it's a cleaning cloth. Lots of people will tell stories to do with expectations, to do with childhood, or perhaps to do with relationship-based expectations.
Yeah.
Funny. There's lots of really funny ones. There was one really early on. By a friend that said ironing his pants. That always gets laughed.
Yes, indeed.
So I would say the majority, if I had to say a percentage wise, there are more that are complaining than are celebrating.
Yes.
Not surprisingly. But there are those that do. Definitions of what domesticity means to people, that comes up a lot in them as well. Somebody stitched really early on a marmalade jar, and they said something like domesticity is a treat for working people, and for them it meant things like making marmalade or doing some sewing or doing something nice,
the good old banana bread.
The nice things, whereas to other people it's cleaning the toilet and very not the nice thing. So what people kind of frame as domestic is quite interesting. That brings out some interesting.
Do you know what just kind of popped into my head there was this vision of where you said, like most of them are complaining. And do you know what? We're complaining about the fact that we have a house, or that we, it's like, wow. And I'm sure back down to what it is that it means. So many people would love to have a house. These people, just Turkey and Syria, their house are just disintegrated.
Gosh, and I know.
People in Ukraine don't have a house anymore. It's been blown up. And so I think from one side of the point of view, that the kind of privileged members of us who have a house and we can kind of pretend we don't do housework, etc., and have got time to put our thoughts on a duster. There's so many other people, isn't there, of the other side, who would just absolutely love to be complaining about doing housework because that means they've got a house, etc. Yeah, wow.
There is one actually. My mum stitched it, which says privilege or chore, and I think that opened up an interesting conversation. And you're right, and I think there is a tension there because there was a lot of, oh my gosh, I'm so exhausted, I can't believe I'm still expected to do this, etc., etc. And that's a really, really valid experience within the context of those of us that are expressing that. But at the same time, on the other side, you're quite right. There are people that would give their back teeth for that type of privilege. And I think that's why it's important to me that on the one hand, we have the Duster project that mostly sits through the Instagram space, which is very much kind of, let's have a bit of a rant.
A bit of a rant and a laugh.
Yeah, absolutely. But on the other side of it, there's the more serious side where I'm working with people whose domestic situations are compromised. And I don't share those on Instagram because that doesn't feel appropriate. And so it's important that I acknowledge that side of it and give back to that at the same time as providing a space where we can all feel a bit better because we've had a good old moan. And actually, it is exhausting doing it all, doing everything. So, it's important to see both sides of it.
It is. So your role as the bridge, therefore, again, has, come out really strongly. So I'm glad we got to that point there, because you also don't want people to think, oh, well, we're sharing these, some of these things might be quite sad on Instagram. No, you've just, drawn that line there. No, that they don't get shared. Because again, you don't want to put people off, do you either? It's not right.
Well, I think when it's really personal, that doesn't feel like the appropriate space to do it, and that tends to be more maybe that would be an exhibition that was focused on that particular aspect of it, or sometimes it's just that it'll be that I'll run a number of workshops and then people take the dusters away with them. I don't know what they do with them afterwards. And they're invited to submit them if they would like, because I want them, it's important, again, that it's inclusive on all levels. But they generally don't. And that's fine, because what they had was the experience of being able to use this cloth and this process of embroidery to find their voice, to share that voice in a really safe space, to find a way of expressing it that maybe they couldn't do with words for a whole host of different reasons. And the cloth is, in that context, I think, able to be a catalyst for those feelings and is able to hold them. And that moment when that happened is actually all that matters. It doesn't need to go and be something that gets lots of likes or whatever else. It was the moment with that cloth embroidering it that mattered for them. And I have got a project coming up which is more serious and deals with charity and people with needs that will be shared, but that's part of purpose,
to give them a voice. Some people want that voice, don't they? And their voice needs to be heard. So I was actually just going to move on to that. I'm conscious of time here, but so I think we could talk for a week about these. It's just that brilliant. So looking ahead, then, as you say, we've got the peg kind of sub collaboration, which is just a subcategory of all the sorts of dusters that we've had, and send them. So then, looking forward, what have you got coming along the pipeline, Vanessa, that we can keep our eyes out?
Well, I've got applications in for a couple of fringe events. I've started to put together applications for, I'd love to take them to Knit and Stitch or something like that.
Oh, that'd be brilliant. Yes.
Great in that context. So I put an application in for that, whether it happens this year or next year. Yeah, I don't know, but I put an application in for that.
Good.
There's a couple of galleries that I'm talking with about potentially having them in there. And I've got a couple of charity collaborations coming up as well. So, and the other thing that I'm trying to do this year is to do a word theme each month, and to sort of put some suggestions up for how different people might approach working with this as well, because I've realised I do a lot of it in workshops, but actually that would be great to put out through Instagram. So I have to admit I haven't done February yet because I'm buried under sweary dusters. But
well, that was the theme, wasn't it? You can just say that was the theme. That was the theme.
Absolutely. I suppose use the Instagram space as a way of sharing some of the different directions that you could take, so that it doesn't become just a space where you whinge about cleaning, but actually you're able to take that space into some different contexts as well.
Yeah, bring it back to your original kind of question and thoughts, because these things can mutate, can't they, without us actually noticing.
Sometimes you do have to pull them back.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think at the moment I want to pull it back but I also really want to expand it. So it's finding that balance between the two, because during lockdown I took it onto Instagram and it really has grown since then. And that's been really interesting, and I've had some really fantastic opportunities that have come through that. But now that it's there and it's quite got to a decent amount of followers, I think, right, okay, I need to think about what this space looks like now and where it goes within that. But it's a great way of getting international submissions. I mean, it's not unusual to get people from America saying, so what is a duster and where can I get one from? So don't have them over there.
Oh, don't they do any dusting?
We do dusting, but not with beautiful yellow cloths.
So we're just going to end on this one, because I don't know. What do you know? What in America people would call a duster? Then what would you call it?
Thought I was talking about feather duster and wondered how I embroidered onto it
on feathers. Oh wow, wow, yes, that's really interesting. Yeah.
It doesn't always translate. It translates in a large part of Europe, translates in Australia, not so much. But then what I've started to say to people is, look, okay, well, whichever cloth is...
Whatever it is you use.
Whatever it is you use. If you can get a yellow one, that would be brilliant. But actually, use what's authentic to your space. But the principle is that it's a cleaning cloth and it does all these brilliant, amazing things that we've been talking about.
I'm just going to lower the tone now. This has just put this horrifying image in my head. My mum was an absolute so-and-so for, the cleaning cloth bag, the rag bag. Oh God, there'd be pants and all sorts lurking about. Oh no, I've got a picture of a pair of my mum's pants. I don't want them. It's just like, please, stop putting your pants in the rag bag.
Somebody sent me really early on a huge pair of knickers with all of these little tags hanging off it, basically saying this is what we use for cleaning. So you're right in there. Absolutely.
Oh, these things just pop into your head that you'd totally forgotten about. The nightmare of the rag bag and what might erupt.
Yeah, I do remember there being some things in the rag bag when I was growing up that, probably very similar. You don't get rag bags anymore, do you? People just throw it away now. I remember that.
No, I still have a rag bag, old habits, I think. But anyway, right, Vanessa, on that, lowering the tone there about the contents of rag bags and what people can use as cleaning cloths, then, wow, with lots to look forward to. And this really is the never-ending project. Who would have thought in whenever it was, when you started this, that it would still be growing and with so many opportunities and so many ways of connecting with people. So fantastic program. And we could be speaking for another week, but I think we better let everybody go and get the kettle on and have another cuppa, I think.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to talk about dusters with you. Like you say, I could talk about them all week, but I think we've covered a few things here. So, I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you. And to anyone who's listening, the call is open. So we're not swearing anymore. We've finished the swearing, but please do get in touch, through the blog or through Instagram and Stitch Duster. See what you would like to say on it, and it would be fantastic to hear from you and to include that duster in the collection, and we'll take over the world with all of the dusters.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? Because truly there are people listen from literally all over the world to this. It never ceases to amaze me where I see where people have listened from, and so a cleaning cloth. So the best place to find the information now is back on the Domestic Dusters Instagram and the Domestic Dusters blog, and there's details on there, isn't there, and what to do with it, etc. But so the swearing phase has gone, and we're back to your thoughts on domesticity on a duster. So and I'd love to know, Vanessa. So if you say, I found you on Stitchery Stories, Vanessa, that would be really great to hear about as well.
Absolutely. Always good to find out how you hear about the project.
Exactly. It's fascinating in itself as well. Now, we don't think we're talking to a void, do we? We know we're like talking to real people who are of all different places. So I find that extremely fascinating.
Absolutely, and thank you to everybody who's listening in.
Yeah, indeed. Right, okie dokie. Well, I'm going to go and dash off, and I'm going to go do some ironing and some dusting.
Thank you ever so much. It's great to speak to you.
Thanks so much, Vanessa. It's been absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Bye for now. Take care. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and information around this podcast. Please visit stitcherystories.com. Of course, you can listen to Stitchery Stories on plenty of podcast apps at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify and plenty more besides. You can also ask your smart speaker to play Stitchery Stories podcast too. But wherever you listen, why not leave us a rating and a review to encourage other people to listen too? I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that for me. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. Keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery stories.